Have you ever thought that nature itself can act as a ruthless judge, punishing those who dare to disrespect her? Imagine the scene. A silent night in the Kentucky countryside. A man trying to steal equipment from an isolated barn, believing that no one is looking. It seems like an ordinary, even courageous action, but what happened next was something that no one could predict. By forcing an old door, he ended up bumping into a colossal nest of marimbondos, a structure made with care and strength, which remained hidden in the roof of the barn. In an instant, his entire robbery attempt turned into an absolute nightmare. Insects defending their territory detached themselves from the ceiling with impressive force, forming a killer swarm that fell on it in a matter of seconds. The desperate screams of that man echoed throughout the farm, arousing the attention of neighbors and the entire local community. Stay with me until the end, because what you will discover now may surprise you. The force of nature is often more ruthless than we can imagine. The scene that followed was pure chaos. The terrified thief tried to flee, but his course was marked by an uncontrolled escape through the open countryside, as fences were knocked down and he struggled aimlessly. The scene looked like something out of a horror movie, but it was the harsh reality of those who decided to challenge their own environment in search of an inordinate advantage. When police arrived at the scene, they found the man lying on the ground, almost unconscious, covered in wounds caused by the stingers of the killer swarm. For everyone who was there was no doubt. No one gets away with choosing the wrong path, especially when punishment comes from nature itself. And this story, which mixes suspense and valuable lessons, is just beginning. What will come next will show that in the struggle between man and nature, the balance is often brutal and fair. If you found this story of letting anyone's hair down, know that it serves as a reminder that nature has its own rules and often responds ruthlessly when we are disrespectful to it. Situations like this make us reflect on the limits of what we consider control and on the importance of respecting natural balance. Sharing experiences or opinions about similar cases that you have experienced or heard about increases our connection and helps us understand that we are not alone in this world full of surprises. If this theme has made you feel more attentive or even more aware of what can happen when we play with the environment, leave here in the comments what touched you the most or caught your attention. Your participation is essential for this channel to continue growing and reaching more people who, like you, are interested in real stories and life lessons. Liking the video is a way to show that you value this content, and subscribing to the channel ensures that you do not miss any news, always staying informed about stories that surprise us and teach us something important. After all, together we can build a community where learning and reflection go hand in hand. So stay with me, because there is still much more to come in this story that shows us the power of nature and the importance of respect for the world around us. It was dawn on a remote farm in the heart of Kentucky. An almost absolute silence dominated the environment, interrupted only by the constant sound of crickets and the wind blowing gently between the trees. The peace of that place seemed untouchable, as if time had stopped there, preserving the quiet routine of those who live in the simplicity of the countryside. But that night, something different happened. A strange, high-pitched sound broke the lull coming from the old barn, a wooden structure that seemed to stand the test of time, hiding secrets under its aged surface. The farmer, accustomed to the routine of taking care of the property, was suddenly awakened by that strange noise, something that he could not immediately identify, but that aroused a sense of immediate alertness. He got up slowly, trying not to make a sound, and walked to the window to observe what might be causing that unusual noise. Still half sleepy, he noticed a shadow moving in the direction of the barn, something that seemed out of the ordinary and that aroused a curiosity mixed with a little apprehension. That silence, so characteristic of the interior of the state, now seemed heavy, as if the whole farm was holding its breath to understand what was going on there. When he got close enough, the farmer noticed that there were flashing lights inside the barn, as well as sounds of objects being moved or dragged. Suddenly, a sense of danger seized him, but even so, his curiosity was greater. With careful steps, he approached the barn door, which was ajar. As he slowly pushed open the wooden door, a mixture of the smell of aged wood and something stronger, almost metallic, invaded his nostrils. Within that dark space, he could make out a silhouette trying to move quickly. A man who seemed to be in a shoplifting action. The thief, upon noticing the presence of the farmer, tried to hide, but what he did not imagine was that by forcing a barn door, he would end up triggering a reaction that would change everything. When pushing the door, a ceiling structure, which seemed to be attached precariously, came loose and fell heavily on the thief. The impact was immediate and frightening, forming a kind of cascade of marimbondos that broke free from a colossal nest hidden in the roof of the barn. In a matter of seconds, a huge cloud of insects began to spread throughout the space, and what looked like an ordinary robbery attempt turned into a scene of pure terror. The screams of the man who desperately tried to flee echoed throughout the farm, arousing the attention of the entire neighborhood. The sound was so strong that it seemed to reverberate throughout the region, as if a greater force was warning someone that there, at that moment, nature had taken revenge. That silence of peace was abruptly replaced by a chaos of shouting, the noise of hurried footsteps, and fences being torn down in an attempt to escape that invisible and deadly threat. The frightened farmer watched the scene with a racing heart, not understanding exactly what had happened. In the dark of night, what was supposed to be a simple robbery turned into a fight for survival. When police arrived at the scene, they found the man lying on the ground, almost unconscious, covered in wounds and with eyes wide with fear. The scene was one of strong visual impact, a brutal reminder that the natural world often responds quickly and definitively to any provocation or disrespect. In that moment, everything became clear. No one, no matter how prepared they are, can escape the impact of a wrong decision, especially when it involves challenging their own environment. Still, that episode was not only a story of punishment, but also a revelation about the hidden forces that we often try to ignore in the routine of everyday life. As we reflect on all this, one thing becomes evident. Nature, with its strength and unpredictability, is either an ally or an adversary depending on our actions. Every decision we make, every boundary we cross, can trigger a chain of events that change everything from one hour to the next. And often they remind us that the impact of our choices goes beyond what we can imagine, revealing hidden truths that only become apparent when we face the behind the scenes of a true story. The strength of that killer swarm was a powerful lesson, a reminder that respect for the natural world is key to avoiding irreversible consequences. And in this scenario, it is clear that the journey of those who challenge the universe often ends in the same lesson, that harmony with nature is the only way to ensure survival and balance. He said, "That makes sense to me." A man had trespassed on the property that night, moving with a confidence that seemed almost inordinate, as if he believed the farm to be empty, with no one to stop his act. His intention was clear: to reach the equipment stored in the barn, which, although old, still had considerable value for those who depended on them to maintain the routine of the farm. That thief, perhaps because he had already gone through other unsuccessful attempts, or because he thought the area was poorly guarded, entered there believing that his plan would be quick, easy, and without great consequences. He approached quietly, believing that the darkness of the night and the isolation of the farm would be allies in his illicit action. However, at that early stage, he had a false sense of security. He believed he was acting intelligently, almost invisibly, while his light, distracted footsteps searched for the valuables. His mind was focused on the reward that this action could bring, without imagining that soon everything would change in a brutal and unexpected way. His overconfidence, coupled with the silence of the night, created an illusion that nothing could go wrong. He believed that time worked in his favor, that the property was unguarded, and that, with a few minutes, he would be able to take what he wanted and disappear before anyone noticed. But what he did not know was that the environment hid a natural trap, a kind of secret kept by the very roof of the barn. The ancient structure, which supported the weight of the roof, had a huge nest of colossal marimbondos. These insects, which undergo a constant transformation, were there protecting their territory with a ferocity that only those who know the force of nature can understand. For the thief, this was a simple invasion, an act of disrespect for a particular property, but for the marimbondos, it was an invasion of a space that they defended with their own lives. Moving a heavy door, the man did not notice the delicate wooden structure that supported the nest, nor the amount of marimbondos that accumulated there, ready to react. When the door was forced, the impact was enough for the ceiling to fall apart, releasing a huge amount of insects that quickly spread through the environment. The swarm, which until then had remained calm and protected, turned into a mass of defensive beasts. Without warning, an avalanche of marimbondos fell on him, turning his attempted robbery into a desperate fight for survival. What seemed like a quick and discreet action soon became a nightmare of gigantic proportions. The cries of man cutting through the night with the sound of pain and fear echoed throughout the farm, like a silent warning that nature does not accept encroachments or disrespect. The confidence of the thief, who believed himself to be in control, began to turn into complete chaos. His movements became those of an escape attempt, but he had no idea what he was really facing. The insects, moved by a defensive instinct, attacked with a ferocity that seemed boundless, stinging and stinging without stopping, while he struggled aimlessly, running from side to side, knocking down fences and getting lost in the darkness of the field. When the police arrived at the scene, they found the man lying on the ground, almost unconscious, covered with injuries, his eyes wide with fear. Her appearance revealed the emotional and physical impact of a situation that completely escaped her control. The scene clearly showed that in the battle between man and the force of nature, whoever chooses to disrespect or defy always ends up paying too high a price. There at that moment, it became evident that the false security of a quick action, without thinking about the consequences, can turn into a real lesson of impact, a story that reveals hidden truths that only become evident when we are in the shoes of someone facing the hoop of this type of situation. And as silence again dominates the scene, reflection on this experience becomes inevitable. The force of nature often acts silently, but its response is always powerful and definitive. Every decision we make, every boundary we cross, has its impact, and that impact can come in ways we never imagined. The journey of those who challenge the environment often reveals a hidden truth. The universe responds, and responds brutally, to protect what is its own. That thief's story, marked by a rapid transformation from the comfort of trust to outright terror, serves as a reminder that respect for the natural world is not just a matter of education, but a matter of survival. After all, the destruction of an ancient structure, of a nest of marimbondos, shows that the impact of our decisions is often greater than we can understand at the time, and that the true revelation lies precisely behind the scenes of these actions. When the man decided to force open the wooden barn door, he had no idea what was really about to happen. That sudden movement, charged with a misguided hope that everything would end quickly, was the trigger that set off a chain of irreversible events. The impact was strong, rumbling inside the dark space, causing the ancient structure to shake and release dust. But what he didn't know was that by exerting that force, he had just released a force far greater than any metal or wooden object could withstand. The ceiling, which had seemed firm until then, began to slowly sag, as if resisting an invasion, until suddenly a part of it came loose with a deafening bang. The moment that structure fell, what seemed to be a simple act of theft turned into a situation of almost cinematic impact. A colossal nest of marimbondos, hidden in the roof of the barn for years and years, was exposed to the world from 1 hour to the next. The amount of insects that resided there was impressive, a real fortress of agitation and ferocity. Without warning, an avalanche of marimbondos broke off, forming a cloud of insects that spread in a chaotic and frightening way. The sight of that giant swarm, falling like a shower of stingers, was a moment of pure transformation. The thief, who until then had tried to hide his presence, found himself completely overwhelmed by a force that he had no control over, a force that, in his arrogance, he completely ignored. That impulsive action, which seemed to be just another attempted robbery, became a turning point in the story. From that impact, the narrative went from being about ordinary theft to becoming a lesson in impact, a silent revelation that nature does not accept invasion or disrespect. The marimbondos began to attack relentlessly, stinging and stinging without stopping, in a kind of primordial defense that sought to protect their home. The sound of desperate screams echoing through the field was not only that of pain, but also the sign of a situation that was beyond the control of anyone present there. The man, in an attempt to escape from the chaos, ran away, running over fences, tripping over stones, desperate, without a definite direction. His unbridled run, punctuated by attempts to escape the swarm, seemed a movement of desperation that reflected his own vulnerability to the force of nature. Meanwhile, in the darkness of the night, the scene became increasingly surreal. The sound of the commotion, the screams, the clatter of fences being knocked down, it all felt like a choreography of an impact no one could have predicted. The thief's every move seemed driven by a survival instinct, an internal struggle between the arrogance to defy and the need to protect himself. Every second, his image transformed, reflecting a journey that, at that moment, seemed without return. When the police arrived at the scene, they found a scene of complete chaos. The man lying on the ground, almost unconscious, covered with injuries, his eyes wide and breathing difficult. There, in that instant, it became clear that the impact of a wrong decision, no matter how simple it may seem, can trigger a reaction that will change everything definitively. That episode left an indelible mark on the memory of those who witnessed it all. It was not just a story of a thief who faced a swarm of marimbondos, but a true lesson in how our actions often have transformational effects that go far beyond what we can imagine. The force of nature, silent and implacable, has shown that it does not accept challenges, that it responds in the same intensity, and that in the end, the truth hidden there is that our every decision can trigger an invisible impact, but of profound consequences. All this reinforces a fundamental idea. Before acting impulsively, we must understand that the universe has its own laws, and they often surprise us, revealing that respect for the environment is the only way to prevent our journey from ending in a painful lesson of transformation and irreversible impact. Above that man's head, an ancient and seemingly fragile structure broke loose from the roof of the barn, as if it had been stuck for years on end, waiting only for the right moment to give way. And in that instant, she gave in. A loud bang reverberated through the environment, and a colossal amount of marimbondos, who for years had protected their nest, were released in an avalanche of ferocity. Within seconds, the cloud of insects began to spread, covering everything around with a mass of agitation and menace. Hundreds of angry marimbondos, with sharp stingers and a wild determination to defend their space, fell on the man who, until then, desperately tried to escape from that chaos. At that moment of dramatic turn, the scene seemed to come out of a nightmare, a horror movie that unfolded before the eyes of those who watched, but which, in fact, was pure reality. The impact of that swarm was something that no one could predict, not even the most experienced of observers of the force of nature. The man who had once believed himself intelligent in his invasion now found himself completely vulnerable in the face of a force beyond any human control. His cries of pain and terror broke the silence of the night as he tried to flee, but the insects instinctively attacked with a ferocity that seemed boundless. Each sting was a reminder that the fatal mistake had been made at the wrong time, in the wrong attempt, to challenge what is greater than anyone can imagine. The explosion of pheromones, the chaos of movements, and the intensity of the scene created an almost surreal atmosphere. The man struggled, stumbled, tried to protect himself, but the marimbondos, guided by a primitive defense instinct, gave no respite. Their stingers found flesh, skin, and even clothing, leaving deep marks of a battle that seemed lost from the start. Every second felt like an eternity as he crawled across the floor trying to hide or flee from that merciless attack. Fear there became an invisible force that dominated his entire essence, a feeling of despair that only increases with each sting that penetrates the skin. And from that moment on, the whole narrative turned into a kind of brutal lesson about the limits of respect for the force of nature. The impact of that moment was not only physical, but also psychological. The story of that man, who entered with an idea of theft and left with concrete proof that life reserves surprises that defy all logic, was marked by a hidden truth. The most common mistake, often, lies in the arrogance of thinking that we can manipulate or challenge the natural world without consequences. Understanding this lesson is critical for anyone who wants to learn about transformation and growth, as it is in adversity that we reveal our true strengths and limits. As the man tried to catch his breath, the scene around him remained charged with an energy of destruction and rebirth. The marimbondos, after fulfilling their role of defense, began to disperse, leaving behind a scene of devastation and a lesson that echoes in the mind of those who witness the impact of a poorly thought-out decision. The truth hidden there is that many times, it is we ourselves who create the conditions for life to put us back at our limits, teaching us that respect for the greater forces is what guarantees the continuity of our journey. And this experience, brutal at its core, reveals that every transformation begins in the awareness that our decisions have weight and impact, shaping our story in ways that we cannot always predict at the exact moment. The man, seized with an almost primal fear, turned with desperate speed as he felt the sharp pain of the stings and the weight of the approaching threat without respite. His cries of pain and dread echoed through the night as he tried to pull away from that raging swarm that seemed a force of nature itself, driven by a defense mission that admitted of no retreat. Every step he took felt like a struggle against himself, a race against time to escape that chaos of stingers and insects that chased him with an intensity that bordered on the irrational. His eyes searched desperately for an escape route, a path that could lead him away from that flying hell, but the open field looked like a maze of obstacles he had created himself as he tried to flee the threat. With each attempt to hide behind trees or throw themselves in the middle of the bush, the marimbondos adjusted their strategy, maintaining the relentless attack, driven by a protective instinct that gave no rest. The man stumbled, knocked over fences, fell to his knees and struggled with a force that seemed to have no effect, as if nature itself was determined to show him who is in charge there. His movements were disordered, almost like a dance of despair, as he desperately tried to get rid of the stingers that insisted on finding him, piercing his skin, leaving visible marks of a battle he did not have the strength to win. That chase seemed to have no end, a scene of absolute chaos where logic was lost in the confusion of screams, uncontrolled movements, and the constant sound of insects buzzing. The man, who until a few minutes ago had been sure that he could get away with a quick action, now saw that his arrogance had been an illusion. I was there, completely vulnerable, being dominated by a force that knew no bounds. Each sting was a cruel reminder that challenging nature itself is an unequal battle in which unpredictability and the impact of decisions can lead to ultimate defeat. And as he desperately tried to escape, the scenery around him seemed to turn into a real scene of horror, almost like a manifestation of the very hidden truth that many prefer to ignore. It is as if all the arrogance of challenging the environment is being confronted there at that moment, with a force that admits of no contest. The image of a helpless victim running aimlessly, surrounded by a cloud of angry insects, shows that every action has a reaction, and that the impact of a wrong decision can become a lesson that will be marked in the memory of those who witness or live such a situation. Nature, with its immense and silent strength, often acts as a kind of mirror that reveals our own limitations, our failures when it comes to realizing how small we are in front of a universe that works by its own rules. Every flap of wings, every sting is proof that respect for the greater forces is the only way to avoid the devastating consequences that can arise from an attitude of defiance or neglect. And as man struggles to survive, the question remains of how far we can go when we ignore the signs of danger, or when we believe we can manipulate the environment without paying the price. The images that remained from that moment carry a powerful message, that every journey of transformation involves recognizing our limits and understanding that sometimes the best strategy is to accept that there are forces that we cannot control. The strength of that swarm of marimbondos was a clear revelation that arrogance and recklessness can turn a simple invasion into a battle of lives. And when it was time to flee from that threat, all that remained was a desperate rush, an attempt to escape the impact that in fact had already been realized there, in the essence of each bite, in the memory of each moment of panic. The impact of that chaos, that peak of adrenaline and fear, left marks not only on the skin, but also on the soul of the man who, as he turned to flee, clearly realized that respect for the force of nature is one of the greatest lessons we can learn on our journey. Every decision, every step we take in life has the potential to lead us down paths of transformation or destruction. And in that instant, it became apparent that every arrogance, every attempt to challenge what is greater, can end up in a situation that sooner or later teaches us the true truth hidden behind all this history, that the impact of our actions is something that we can only truly understand when we face the behind the scenes of a lesson that life itself offers us. As chaos ensued that night, the man's cries of despair echoed throughout the farm, breaking through the early morning silence and sparking an instant reaction in the neighborhood. It was not long before the sounds of agony became a kind of warning signal, and soon the residents of nearby houses began to leave their rooms, puzzled by the unusual noise that cut through the air. Some, accustomed to the routine of the camp, still tried to imagine what might be happening, but most knew somehow that this was something out of the ordinary. When they saw the scene, disbelief took hold of everyone. The sight of that man lying on the ground, surrounded by a cloud of marimbondos that still buzzed around him, seemed like a scene from a natural horror movie, almost surreal. For many who were there, it seemed a kind of direct punishment from nature itself, a justice that manifests itself silently, but that arrives definitively. The community, which has always lived with respect for the forces of the environment, could not help but be impressed by what it had just witnessed. Some neighbors, who had already seen isolated episodes of insect attacks, never imagined that one day they would witness something so strong, so visceral in its essence. The narrative of that moment quickly became testimony to a hidden truth, a lesson that life itself insisted on teaching in a clear way. Nature responds to disrespect with a force that knows no limits. It was impossible not to feel the sense that all this had been a kind of deserved punishment, a punishment that came without warning, in a way that only the very essence of the natural world can manifest. Some people, still stunned, commented among themselves that it felt like a lesson in humility, a reminder that our decisions, however small they may seem, carry an impact that can reveal itself in unexpected ways. And at the same time, this community reaction reinforced the idea that this whole story had a veracity that could not be ignored. It was concrete proof of how connecting with the environment, understanding its laws, and the need to respect the invisible forces that govern the planet are essential for our very survival. From that moment on, the episode became a living testimony, a story that circulated by word of mouth, reinforcing the importance of being attentive to the behind the scenes of our journey. Each person there had a different vision, but they all shared the same feeling that something bigger had happened, something that carried a message of transformation and reflection. The scene, which initially seemed like a simple consequence of a reckless action, turned out to be a revelation that our relationship with the environment needs to be guided by respect, attention, and a deeper understanding of the hidden truths that we often ignore. Because deep down, the force of nature is not only a destructive force, but also a source of learning, of transformation, of connection with what is true, and that is often hidden behind the scenes of our routine. And so, as silence slowly reigned that night, the community was marked by a lesson that was etched in everyone's memory. Everything we do, every decision made in haste or arrogance, has an impact that can be reflected in unexpected ways, often as viscerally as that marimbondo attack. That scene made it clear that true strength lies in the ability to recognize our limits, and in the ability to understand that respect for the forces of the natural world is what keeps us in balance. The impact of that moment, which seemed so isolated, actually turned into a profound revelation about our journey, because by witnessing that punishment of nature itself, the community understood that the truth hidden there was not just about an insect or an invasion. It was a life lesson, an opportunity to awaken to a new mindset, a reflection on how our actions can generate consequences that go far beyond what we can imagine. Minutes into the chaos, the silence that followed seemed almost surreal. The scene of destruction and panic seemed to have been an isolated moment in time, a kind of living reminder that the force of nature does not forgive those who disrespect its boundaries. When the police arrived at the scene, they found the man lying on the ground, almost unconscious, covered with wounds and stings. His panting reflected the desperate effort to flee from a threat that, in fact, had already ended. At first, it seemed that he had been the victim of an uncontrollable situation, but as they looked more closely, it became clear that his injuries were the result of his own recklessness, of a decision that led to an impact that he could hardly overcome. The arrest was swift, without resistance, as the man's own physical state indicated that he did not have enough strength to fight or react. The police officers, experienced in dealing with extreme situations, immediately understood that this was not a common occurrence, but a direct consequence of an impulsive and disrespectful action. The scene of the barn remained there, intact, like an invisible fortress protected by those marimbondos who, in the end, had fulfilled their mission of defense. There were no padlocks, locks, or alarms that could stop what had been a natural reaction, a response that so powerful proved unbeatable. The environment, silent now, bore the mark of an impact that went beyond the physical, penetrating the essence of those who witnessed the scene. inviting us to reflect on the decisions we make and the backstage of a transformation that is often invisible, but that leaves deep marks. As the man was led away by police officers, the countryside scene appeared to regain its calm, although traces of destruction were still visible. That moment marked the end of an action that might seem simple, but in fact had consequences that no one could foresee. The impact of that moment was proof that our choices, often made in haste or arrogance, carry a weight that only reveals itself at the right time. The force of nature, which that day showed its true face, left a clear lesson. Respect for the limits of the environment is fundamental to avoid irreversible consequences. And at the same time, it showed that the universe, with its silent wisdom, acts fairly, protecting what is its own and responding according to the severity of the invasion. With the man in custody and the scene cleared of visible threats, there was a sense that the story had reached its endpoint, but also that the whole experience had an essence that goes far beyond the isolated episode. It reveals in a crystal clear way that our actions create a chain of impacts that often only become evident after a while, in the form of hard but necessary lessons. What happened there in that silent field was more than a punishment. It was an opportunity to understand that true strength lies in connecting with what is greater, in understanding that respect for the invisible rules of the universe is what ensures our own survival. And at its deepest core, this story reminds us that every transformation begins with the decision to act more consciously, to reflect before challenging what we cannot control. That night, marked by screams, chaos, and impact, revealed that true power lies in recognizing our limits and in the courage to learn from every mistake. And as the man walked away, bearing the marks of a lesson he would hardly forget, the scene stood there silent, as a testimony that nothing is stronger than the strength that nature itself reserves for those who try to challenge it. The impact of that episode, which seemed like an isolated episode, actually echoes in the soul of everyone who witnessed it, reinforcing the idea that respect for life, the environment, and its laws is what sustains our journey. Because deep down, this whole story is a narrative about transformation, an opportunity to rethink our decisions and reassess our mentality in the face of the impact that our actions can generate, often in ways that we did not even imagine at the time. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this story of the farmer and the swarm of marimbondos reveals a hidden truth that many people prefer to ignore. Our decisions, however minor they may seem, carry an impact that we often only realize when it is too late. Life's journey is made of choices, and each of them shapes who we are, what we are building, and often what we are destroying. When someone decides to challenge the environment, ignore the signs, or act arrogantly, they are actually making room for a transformation that can be both learning and pain. After all, nature, with its silent force, does not respond at random. It is a kind of mirror that reveals our true essence, our attitudes, and especially our mentality before the world. This story also makes us reflect on the invisible impact that our actions have, often without us realizing it. As in a chain, each decision is a link that can strengthen or weaken our entire structure. When we disregard limits, when we act without thinking about the consequences, we end up creating a reaction that, in most cases, is proportional to what was done. And this reaction, no matter how harsh or unfair it may seem at the time, actually works as a form of balance, a kind of natural law that seeks to restore harmony. It is as if the universe had an invisible scale, where every weight, every action has its consequence, and often this consequence comes from where you least expect it, in a way that makes you question whether it was all a coincidence or a true impact of fate. What remains then is the realization that true transformation happens when we learn to listen behind the scenes to our own story. It is they who reveal the hidden truths, the teachings that only come to light at the right time, when pain or impact make us stop and reflect. This journey of self-knowledge is fundamental, because only in this way can we understand that our attitudes are inserted in a larger cycle where each action reverberates in our life in ways that we often cannot foresee. And as we realize this, we begin to develop a more mature, more conscious mindset, more aligned with respect for the forces that govern the universe. Because deep down, learning to deal with the impact of our decisions is one of the greatest transformations we can experience in life, a true lesson in humility and connection with what is greater than our momentary will. This story also reinforces an idea that many avoid, that fate is not something that happens by chance, but rather the result of a sum of conscious or unconscious choices. From the moment we understand that our actions create a chain of effects, we begin to reflect more carefully before acting impulsively. It is an exercise in maturity that helps us to see beyond the present, to think about the long-term consequences, and to realize that the impact is not only physical or immediate, but also emotional, spiritual, and even social. When we put this into practice, our journey becomes more aligned with values that really matter, such as respect, responsibility, and humility. Thus, each step taken becomes an opportunity for growth, learning, true transformation, because we understand that everything we do today influences what we will be tomorrow. And in this process, the greatest revelation is that true strength lies in the ability to learn from each impact, to recognize our mistakes, and to seek constant evolution. Because the story of the man who defied the environment and faced the relentless force of the swarm of marimbondos reminds us that life is a journey of discovery, where learning happens behind the scenes of the experience itself. Every impact, every pain, is an opportunity to become better versions of ourselves, more aware, more connected to the universe. When we understand this, we begin to value each decision, each moment, as a fundamental piece in the construction of a story that, in the end, reveals itself as a great lesson in transformation, resistance, and connection with what is greater than us. After all, the impact that seems destructive at the time may actually be the catalyst for a change that takes us to a new level of understanding and evolution. If you've made it this far, it's because you've really connected with this story and the lessons it brings. I believe that throughout the video, we were able to reflect together on the importance of respecting the environment and thinking about our actions, because they have an impact that often goes beyond what we can imagine. No wonder this whole narrative serves as a reminder that life responds fairly to our attitudes, and that learning to recognize our limits is a big part of growing up. If this content made sense to you, how about subscribing to the channel so you stay on top of everything we share here, always with stories that teach and make us think. And if you want, leave a comment saying that I'm with you until the end, or that this message was for you. I love to hear from those who accompany us until the end. It is a way to strengthen this exchange and show that these themes really make a difference in our journey. Oh, and there's a video here on the side that complements exactly that subject. Click there and continue with me there, because there are more stories and reflections waiting for you. Thank you for being with me so far, and until the next episode where we will continue to explore these learnings that life has to offer us.